You know, some secrets can literally win wars. And then they're the people who carry those secrets. People who become ghosts, their names just fading away even as their actions completely change the world. Well, this is the story of one of those men, a spy whose intelligence might just be the reason America won its revolution.
Yeah, this quote right here from our source material, it just hits you, doesn't it? It's not just about what he did. It's about a massive contribution followed by this deep, intentional silence.
All right, so who was this guy? Who was the spy who managed to pull the wool over the eyes of the entire British Empire, who handed the Americans the single biggest victory of the war, and then just vanished from the history books for almost 200 years? Let's dive in.
Okay, so to really get who this spy was, you gotta understand the world that made him. And here's the wild part. The brutal, dehumanizing world of slavery was the very thing that forged his greatest weapon, his mind. Let's just lay out the basic facts. His name was James Armistead, born into slavery around 1760 in Virginia, and legally, he wasn't even seen as a person. He was property, just an entry in a ledger. That's the world he was born into.
Now, his mother, Ruth, she taught him these rules. And on the surface, they're about survival, right? How to stay alive in a system designed to crush you. But think about it. Never show what you're really thinking. Keep your mind hidden. What she was really teaching him, without even knowing it, was the art of espionage. And that was the massive disconnect. The people who owned him saw property. An invisible, simple-minded laborer. But underneath that mask, James was becoming a master observer, a brilliant reader of people. He was training to be a spy his entire life, and nobody had a clue.
So the big question is, how does a man in his position, an enslaved man from a Virginia plantation, end up becoming the most important spy for the Continental Army? Well, it all kicks off when he crosses paths with a young, fiery 23-year-old French general, the Marquis de Lafayette.
See, Lafayette got something that almost no one else did. The very people that society ignored, they could be the best spies. So he gives James this mission. And you have to understand how insanely dangerous this was. Go into the enemy's camp, alone. No safety net, no backup. If he got caught, that was it. Instant execution. No questions asked.
Okay, and this is where the story goes from incredible to just completely off the charts. James played his part so perfectly, acting so grateful and simple that the British High Command looked at him and thought, hey, we could use this guy. They actually recruited him to go back and spy on the Americans for them.
So now, just imagine this. He is officially a double agent. He's juggling these three completely different lives in his head. He's feeding real intel to the Americans, carefully feeding fake intel to the British, and all the while, he's just this guy desperate to be free. The mental gymnastics here, it's just staggering. Not one slip-up. All right, so now we get to the payoff. This is the moment where all of James's secret, dangerous work changes the course of history. We're not just talking about helping a little bit. We're talking about the intelligence that directly led to the final, war-winning victory at Yorktown.
It really all hinges on this one report in late July. James is in the British camp, and he learns that General Cornwallis is moving his entire army to a small coastal town called Yorktown. That right there, that was the golden ticket. It was the piece of the puzzle that allowed George Washington to scrap his other plans, secretly march his army 500 miles, and with the help of the French Navy, spring the perfect trap.
And the result? Almost 8,000 British and Hessian troops, a whole army, were forced to surrender. This wasn't just another battle. This was the knockout punch. It basically broke Britain's will to keep fighting, and it was all set in motion by a spy they never even saw.
So the war is over. America is free. You'd think that's the end of the story, right? Happy ending? Well, not for James. For the man who may have made it all possible, his own fight for freedom was just getting started.
And this is the part of the story that's just, it's infuriating. He risked his life for a nation built on the idea of liberty, and what happens? That liberty doesn't apply to him. After the war, he was considered property once again and sent right back to his owner.
But Lafayette, he didn't forget. He absolutely kept his word. He wrote this powerful recommendation, basically telling the Virginia government, hey, this guy James, he performed essential services for our cause. He's entitled to a reward. And everyone knew exactly what that meant. His freedom.
And what did the state of Virginia do? They said, no. Petition denied. Can you imagine that? The man who was a hero of the Revolution sent back to the fields.
the hope he must have felt just crushed by the very system he helped create. But Lafayette was not the kind of guy to just let it go. When he found out James was still a slave 2 years later, he was disgusted. He sent another letter, this one even stronger, saying he'd never met a man he esteemed more highly, and that his service was most essentially important. And finally, it worked. But get this, it took over 5 years. 5 years after the victory he helped engineer, James Armistead was granted his freedom. And in an amazing gesture, he took the last name of the man who never gave up on him, becoming James Armistead Lafayette.
Okay, so he's free. But freedom and recognition are two very different things. As America started crafting its own story, its own mythology, James's part in it, it was just erased. It was an inconvenient truth that didn't fit the narrative they wanted to tell.
I mean, just look at this comparison. You've got Nathan Hale, right? America's most famous spy. He got caught on his first mission. It failed. Meanwhile, you have James Armistead Lafayette, who ran this brilliant double-agent network for months and delivered the intel that won the war, and he was forgotten for over 150 years. That doesn't happen by accident. That's a choice.
And the craziest thing is, the proof was always there. It was just sitting in archives, waiting. Lafayette's letters, government records. It took historians until the middle of the 20th century to finally start digging it all up and putting the pieces of his story back together. It's been this long, slow process of bringing him back from the shadows.
And even today, that erasure isn't fully undone. The man who was so critical to the victory at Yorktown, we don't even know where he's buried. His final resting place is unmarked, lost somewhere in the Virginia soil.
So that's where we'll leave it. The story of James Armistead Lafayette. It really makes you think, doesn't it? It's not just about what happened back then. It forces us to ask a really tough question about history itself. Whose stories do we choose to tell? And maybe more importantly, whose do we choose to forget?